The morning they handed me the keys, I couldn't feel my hands. It wasn't the cold. It was late September in Ontario, yes, but I'd lived through enough Canadian autumns to know that wasn't it. It was something else entirely. The lawyer, a quiet man named Gerald Walsh, slid the envelope across the mahogany desk and said, almost apologetically, "She wanted you to have everything, Edward. The house on Elm, the accounts, and the property." He paused on that last word. The property? As if he already knew what those two words would do to me. I stared at the envelope for a long moment. Dorothy had been gone for 11 days. 11 days since I'd held her hand in the palliative ward at Sunnybrook while she drifted in and out of sleep. 11 days since she'd looked at me with those gray eyes still sharp, even at the end, and said, "Ed, I need you to understand something. I did everything because I loved you." I told her I knew that. I told her to rest. I told her she didn't need to explain anything. I wish now that I had let her explain. Gerald Walsh cleared his throat gently. "There's a cottage, up near Parry Sound, on Georgian Bay. Dorothy purchased it approximately 8 years ago." He folded his hands. "She left very specific instructions that upon her passing, you were to receive the keys and full title. She also left a letter, sealed, for you alone." I turned the envelope over in my hands. A single key on a plain ring, and a white envelope with my name written in Dorothy's handwriting. Just Ed, the way she'd written my name on birthday cards for 34 years. Here is what I need you to understand about Dorothy and the cottage. I had known it existed. Not the details, not where exactly, not what it looked like, but I had known something was up there, north of the city, in the lake country. She had told me 8 years ago, quietly, over dinner one evening, that she had purchased a small property. A place, she said, where she sometimes went to think. She had asked me calmly, without drama, the way Dorothy did everything never to go there. She said she needed one place in the world that was entirely hers. I was a reasonable man. We had a good marriage. I said, "All right, Dot." I said, "I trust you." For 8 years I had kept that promise. Now, standing in the parking lot of Walsh and Associates on Bay Street, I turned the key over in my fingers and thought about how strange trust is. How you can give it away completely and not realize how much weight it was carrying until the person who held it is gone. I drove home. I made tea. I sat in our kitchen and I read her letter. I will not share every word of it here, because some of it belongs only to me. But I will tell you that by the time I finished reading, I had gone through half a box of tissues, and I understood for the first time why Dorothy had kept her secret for so long. And I understood that I needed to go to Parry Sound. I needed to see it for myself. I left on a Thursday morning, early October, the maples along the highway burning orange and red the way only Ontario manages in the fall. 3 hours north of Toronto, I turned off the highway onto a county road, then onto a gravel lane that wound through birch trees down toward the water. The GPS lost signal twice. I followed the hand-drawn map Gerald had included with the keys. When I came around the last bend in the lane and saw the cottage, I stopped the car and simply sat there. I don't know what I had expected. Something small, maybe. Modest. Dorothy was not a flashy woman, but what I was looking at was a proper four-season cottage, cedar-sided, with a wide wraparound deck and a stone chimney, and a dock that reached out 30 feet over the clearest water I had ever seen. The property was perhaps 2 acres, well kept, the lawn recently cut even though Dorothy had been in hospital for months. Flower boxes under the windows, empty now, but the soil still dark and turned. Someone had been caring for this place. I got out of the car and just stood there in the cool air with the sound of Georgian Bay lapping at the shore, and I felt something shift inside me, something between grief and wonder. I used the key to open the front door and I stepped inside, and I froze. The cottage was beautiful. Warm pine floors, a stone fireplace, furniture that was simple but chosen with care. Bookshelves along the east wall, full of the kinds of novels Dorothy loved, Alice Munro, Margaret Atwood, a worn copy of The Stone Angel I recognized from our own shelves at home, a kitchen with a long harvest table, and photographs. That was what stopped me. Photographs, everywhere. Some of Dorothy, alone, sitting on the dock in summer light with a cup of coffee, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen her. Some of the landscape, the bay in different seasons, and many of Dorothy with a young man I had never seen before in my life. He appeared to be in his mid-30s. Dark hair, slim build, a wide smile that was somehow familiar in a way I couldn't place. In one photograph, he and Dorothy were laughing at something off camera, her hand on his arm. In another, they were sitting at this very harvest table, papers spread between them, both leaning in as though working on something together. In a third, taken on the dock, he had his arm around her shoulders and she was looking up at him with an expression I recognized immediately. It was the way she looked at our children. I sat down in the nearest chair and I held Dorothy's letter and I read the part I had skimmed over the first time, the part I hadn't been ready for. "His name is Thomas," she had written. "He was born in March of 1986, before I met you. I was 22 years old and completely alone, and I made the hardest decision of my life. I gave him to a family in Barrie. I never stopped thinking about him. When he found me, 8 years ago, I was terrified of what you would say, of what the children would say. I was ashamed, Ed, even though I know now I had no reason to be. I should have told you from the beginning. I know that, but I was afraid of losing you, and by the time I understood that you would never have left me over this. Too much time had passed, and I didn't know how to undo the silence. The cottage was his idea, a place we could spend time together without complicated explanations. Please don't hate me, and please, if you can find it in your heart, meet him. He is a good man." I sat in that cottage for a long time. The light moved across the pine floor. A loon called out on the bay. I thought about 34 years of marriage. I thought about the kind of fear that makes a person hold a secret so long it becomes part of them. I thought about my wife at 22 years old, alone, making an impossible choice. And I thought, she protected him. All those years, that's what the cottage was. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a shelter. I was still sitting there when I heard a car on the gravel lane. I assumed it was a neighbor, or perhaps a caretaker. I went to the front window. The car that pulled up was not one I recognized as silver Honda rental plates. 2 people got out, and then a third car appeared behind it, this one I did know. My son's truck. My son, Robert, was 40 years old that fall. He ran a contracting business out of Barrie, which had done well, then badly, then well again, in that cycle that seems to define construction work in Ontario. My daughter, Patricia, was 37, a teacher in Mississauga, divorced 2 years prior, still managing the particular bitterness of a marriage that had ended before she was ready. I loved them both. I also knew them both, and watching them climb out of their vehicles with that particular set to their shoulders, chin forward, jaw tight, I recognized what was coming before they reached the door. Patricia knocked, then opened it without waiting. Robert was behind her. They stopped when they saw me. "Dad." Patricia looked around the cottage. Her eyes moved from the stone fireplace to the bookshelves to the photographs. She crossed the room in 6 steps and stood in front of the photos. She pointed at the young man. "Who is that?" "Come sit down," I said. "Who is that, Dad?" I said, "Come sit down, Patricia." She turned around. Robert had already taken a chair at the harvest table, arms crossed, and I noticed he wasn't looking at the photographs at all. He was looking at the property outside the window, the dock, the bay. His expression was the expression of a man doing arithmetic. I told them what I knew. I told them about Thomas, about the adoption, about Dorothy's letter. I kept it brief. I gave them the facts. The silence afterward was the kind that has weight. Patricia sat down eventually. Her expression had moved through shock into something complicated that I recognized as grief, mixed with anger, the particular emotional weather of someone who has just learned that the person they lost was keeping something from them. I understood it. I felt it myself. Robert, though, surprised me. "So she had another kid," he said. His voice was flat. "Does he have a claim on the estate?" I looked at my son for a long moment. "That's your first question." "It's a reasonable question, Dad." "This place," he gestured at the windows. "The bay, what's it worth, do you think?" "Georgian Bay waterfront, 4-season build, 2 acres, somewhere between 800,000 and $1 million, too. Easy." "And you said she had accounts he might be." "She had no accounts in his name," I said. "The cottage was in her name alone. Everything passes to me. That's what the will says. But he could contest." "Robert," I kept my voice steady. "Your mother just died. We are not having a conversation about contesting her will in the cottage she built for her son, her other son." He pushed back from the table. "Come on, Dad. You're not even a little bit angry about this? She lied to you for 8 years. She had a whole life up here that she kept from you. From all of us." "She didn't lie," I said. "She didn't tell me everything. Those aren't the same thing. That's a very convenient distinction." Patricia had been quiet through all of this. Now she looked up. "How old is he?" 38. "Does he know about us?" "I don't know yet. I haven't spoken to him. She nodded slowly. She was working through it, I could see, doing the kind of careful internal accounting that Patricia had always done before she said anything she meant. Robert was already on his feet, walking toward the window, his hands in the back pockets of his jeans. "I just think we should be careful," he said, more quietly now. "That's all I'm saying. We don't know this person." What I did not say in that moment, what I had not yet said to anyone, was what else I had found in the cottage. In Dorothy's small writing desk near the window, in the bottom drawer, was a manila folder. Inside were bank statements for an account I had not known about. Not large sums, but regular, monthly transfers. $1,200, sometimes $1,500, going to an account I didn't recognize. They went back 6 years. I had written down the account number. I intended to ask Gerald Walsh about it. I would learn, 3 weeks later, that those transfers had been going to Robert. He had come to Dorothy 4 years before she got sick, during the worst stretch of his business, when a lawsuit from a subcontractor had nearly wiped him out. He had come to her, not to me, to his mother, and she had helped him. She had done it quietly, because she knew Robert well enough to know that asking his father would have cost him something he wasn't ready to lose. And she had done it from the cottage account, because it was separate and private, and she didn't want me to worry. By the time I understood this, the month of October had already taken most of its leaves, and Thomas and I had already had coffee twice. He reached out by email tentatively, the week after I visited the cottage. He said he understood if I didn't want to meet. He said he had no expectations. He said Dorothy had told him a great deal about me, and that she had loved me without reservation, and he wanted me to know that. We met at a Tim Hortons in Barrie, which felt appropriately Canadian and appropriately ordinary for a meeting that was anything but. He was younger in person than in the photographs, or maybe he just looked younger because he was nervous. He held his coffee with both hands, and he didn't push me for anything. He asked about Dorothy's last months. He asked if she had been comfortable. He asked if she had seemed at peace. He cried briefly when I told him she had. He apologized. I told him not to. He was a project manager for an infrastructure firm, married, 2 kids in elementary school. He had grown up in Barrie with a good family. He was clear about this, almost careful about it, as though he wanted me to know his life had not been difficult, that Dorothy had not needed to carry guilt on his behalf. He had found her through a provincial adoption registry when he was 30. Their first meeting had been at a coffee shop too, he said, and he smiled a little at the symmetry. She was terrified, he said. She told me later she almost didn't come, but then she saw me through the window and she said she just knew. I thought about Dorothy sitting in a coffee shop window 8 years ago, watching this man walk across a parking lot, carrying 38 years of her secret toward her, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been clenched. "She talked about you all the time," he said. "She called you the steady one. She said you were the person who made her feel safe to be herself." He looked at me directly. "I don't want anything from the estate, Edward. I have a good life. She gave me enough, just by letting me know her." I drove home from Barrie in the dark, and I thought about my son Robert, and about the $1,200 a month, and about Dorothy sitting at that harvest table deciding how to hold everyone together without letting anyone see the seams. She had been protecting all of us. That was the thing. The whole architecture of the secret, the cottage, the separate account, the careful management of 2 families who didn't know about each other, it was all held up by her trying to keep everyone safe. It was imperfect. It had cost her, I think, more than any of us realized. But it had been built out of love, not deception. I called Robert that evening. I told him I knew about the money. The silence on his end of the line was different from the silence in the cottage. This one had shame in it. "Dad, I was going to tell you." "When?" Another silence. "She asked me not to say anything," he said finally. "She said it was between her and me. And you were content with that arrangement." "I needed help. I know you did. I kept my voice level. You could have come to me. You would have told me to figure it out myself." He wasn't entirely wrong about that. I had spent 30 years believing that the best thing a father could do was let his children solve their own problems. Dorothy had spent 30 years picking up the things that approach let fall through the cracks. We had been, in our different ways, doing our best. "I'm not angry at you," I told Robert. And I meant it, though it took me a moment to locate the truth of it. "But I want you to understand something. Your mother didn't keep that cottage secret because she was ashamed of you or your sister. She kept it secret because she was ashamed of herself, of a decision she made at 22 years old, before she had any of us, when she was alone and frightened and doing what she thought was right. And then she spent 34 years building a life with me and with you and Patricia, And somewhere in the middle of all that, she found the son she'd given away, and she didn't know how to introduce those two worlds without blowing one of them apart. Robert was quiet for a long time. "Do you wish she'd told you?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "I wish she'd told me. I would have understood. Maybe not immediately, but I would have come around." I paused. "But I also understand why she didn't. She was protecting something she loved. She was protecting all of it." Patricia took longer. She came to the cottage with me in early November, when the birches were bare and the bay was slate gray and cold. We walked the property together and she didn't say much. Just looked at everything, the dock, the photographs, the bookshelves, with that careful, assessing look that she'd had since childhood. Eventually, she stood in front of the photo of Dorothy and Thomas on the dock, and she studied it for a long time. "She looks happy here," Patricia said. "Not accusatory, just observational. She does. Happier than I've seen her in years, maybe. I think this place gave her something she needed," I said. Patricia turned around. "Are you going to keep it?" I had been thinking about that. The cottage was worth, as Robert had estimated, somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million at current Georgian Bay waterfront prices. I was 63 years old and retired on a pension from my years as an electrical engineer. I didn't need the money. What I needed, I was still figuring out. "I think I'm going to keep it for now," I said. "And I think I'm going to invite Thomas and his family up next summer." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'd like to meet him." We sat on the deck that afternoon, even though it was cold, wrapped in the old wool blankets Dorothy had folded on the cedar chest, and we drank tea and watched the gray water move, and Patricia told me about her marriage, things she'd never told me before, and I told her about the early years with Dorothy before the children came, stories she'd never heard. We sat there until the light went and the stars came out over the bay, sharp and closed the way they only are away from the city. I thought about Dorothy choosing this place. Driving up here alone 8 years ago, finding the lane through the birch trees, standing on this dock for the first time and thinking, yes, this is where I will build the part of myself I don't know how to explain. There is a version of this story where I am angry, where I feel deceived, where the discovery of Thomas and the cottage and the secret account feels like a wound that won't close. Some days, honestly, it does feel that way. Grief is not a clean or simple thing, and the grief of finding out you didn't fully know the person you loved is its own particular flavor of loss. But there is another version, and it is the one I keep coming back to. In this version, Dorothy was a woman who had lived through something hard before I ever knew her, and who had loved me well for 34 years, and who had, in the last chapter of her life, managed to quietly put something right that she had always believed was wrong. She had found Thomas. She had given him a mother. She had built him a place at Georgian Bay where they could simply be two people who knew each other, without explanation, without the weight of everyone else's feelings. She had asked me to understand that. In the letter, she had said, "I hope you can forgive me for not trusting you enough to share this sooner. You deserve to know. I was just so afraid that in the knowing, I might lose you both." I am writing this down because I want to be clear about what I did with that fear of hers. I did not dismiss it. I did not tell myself she had nothing to be afraid of, because that would have been easy and it would not have been honest. Instead, I sat with it. I sat with the fact that my wife, who knew me better than anyone, had looked at our marriage and calculated that this secret was too large to survive. And then I sat with the fact that she was wrong. She was wrong. Not about everything she was right, that it would have been hard, right, that I would have needed time, right, that Robert and Patricia would have complicated feelings they would have needed to work through. But she was wrong, that it would have broken us. She was wrong that I would not have come around. I wish she had trusted me with it while she was still here to see me come around. That is my only real grief now, not the secret itself, but the years we could have had with Thomas, the summers at the cottage, the grandchildren playing on that dock. All the time the fear took from us. Thomas and I have had dinner together 4 times now. He brought his wife, Claire, the second time a composed, thoughtful woman who is clearly very good at reading rooms, and made the entire evening easier than it had any right to be. His kids are 7 and 9, a girl and a boy. He showed me photographs on his phone, and I looked at them and felt something I didn't quite expect, a particular quality of tenderness that was different from what I felt for Robert's children or Patricia's nieces, not stronger, just different. Newer, like a door opening into a room I didn't know was there. He texted me last week to ask if I had plans for Christmas. I told him I wasn't sure yet. He said no pressure, just wanted me to know the invitation was there. I sat with his message for a long while. Outside my kitchen window, the first snow of the season was coming down over the backyard, slow and steady, covering the garden Dorothy had planted, covering the old maple at the fence line, covering everything in that particular Canadian quiet that only a first snowfall makes. I thought about her up at the cottage in winters past, sitting by the fire with her tea and her Alice Munro, watching the snow come down over Georgian Bay. I wondered if she had felt peaceful there, or if she had felt the weight of the secret, or, and I think this is probably closest to the truth both at once, simultaneously, the way we carry most of the things that matter to us. I picked up my phone and typed back to Thomas. "I'd like that," I wrote. "Let's talk this week and make a plan." I put the kettle on and stood at the window and watched the snow fall on the garden, and I talked to Dorothy the way I have talked to her every day since she died, quietly, internally, without expecting an answer, but somehow always feeling heard. I told her I understood now. I told her I was not angry. I told her that the cottage was beautiful, that she had chosen well, that the water in autumn light was exactly the kind of thing I would have loved if she'd shown me sooner. I told her that Thomas was a good man, that she had been right about that she had always been right about people. And I told her this is the thing I most needed to say. I told her she had been wrong to be afraid, not because the fear wasn't real, but because she had been holding it alone for so long when she didn't have to, when I was right there, when I had been right there for 34 years, steady, the way she always said, just waiting to hold whatever she needed to put down. That is what love requires, I think. Not the absence of secrets, but the courage to eventually let them go. The willingness to trust that the person who chose you will go on choosing you, even after they know everything. She knew that, toward the end. I believe she did. I believe that is why she wrote the letter. I believe that is why she left me the key. I carry it with me still. The key to the cottage on Georgian Bay, on its plain ring. I carry it in my jacket pocket, and sometimes I reach in and close my fingers around it, and I think of Dorothy standing at the door of that cedar cottage in early morning light. Georgian Bay spread out behind her, everything she had built reflected in the water. I think of her, and I think, I understand now, Dot. I forgive you. And more than that, far more than that, I am glad you had this. I am glad you built this for yourself. I am glad that in all the years of taking care of everyone else, you found a way to take care of yourself too. I just wish I had known sooner so I could have told you. You were allowed. You were always allowed.